Hi, indie authors. Valerie Ihsan here, and today in the third episode of the second season, I am stepping away from the norm a little bit. The second season is all about mindset and work-life balance. But I'm going to take a break into that and talk about the Willamette Writers conference that I just came back from. I'm recording this a little bit late because I almost considered not recording a podcast this week because as evidenced by some of the things I talk about this season in the podcast, I was feeling a bit overwhelmed and I decided to take this week off. So it's a yes week for me. I'm just kind of letting myself do whatever I want. And sometimes that means cleaning out the carport, and sometimes that means cleaning the kitchen, and sometimes that means staying in bed and reading an entire novel. So I've done all of those things this week so far, and I've had some lovely visits with friends, and I've had some body work done, which was lovely, getting a massage and getting a chiropractor appointment and all that. So that's my little mini update. The books that I've been reading have been many. And I did if you're a Patreon supporter at the $1 level and you get the monthly connections video, I recorded a video on my book haul from the conference, all the books that I purchased and all the books that were recommended to me that are now on my check this book out list. So you can check out all of those books and book recommendations at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan. And Ihsan is IHSAN. So what I want to do, this is going to be super informal and hopefully quick. I'm just taking my notebook that I took at the conference, and this isn't going to be a true overview of the conference because I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the classes that I took myself. On the first day, I took a master class. This was actually before the conference even technically started. It was an all-day master class with a gentleman called Dong-Won Song, and he is a New York agent, and he gave an all-day class on great beginnings of novels. And some of the takeaway tips that I heard that I took notes on were usually he accepts for submissions the first 10 pages of the novel. So you have 10 pages to hook your agent or the reader if you're self-publishing. And so the opening, and this was a good reminder for me, the opening of the novel actually tells the reader a lot about the novel. And so if that's the goal, then the question becomes, how do I communicate this in that first line, in that first paragraph? How do I communicate that this book is interesting in the first line or first paragraph or first page of the book? So that was something to think about. He talked about the elements of an opening and that there were 5 elements to an opening. One is voice and tone. One is world. There is an L in my word. So voice and tone is the first one. The second is world. The third is character. The fourth is stakes. And the fifth is promises. And so just a one sentence thing on each of those. For voice and tone, he said, if voice is a character, then tone is a promise. He said for world that it's not necessarily the setting of your book, though that's part of it. The world part of your opening is telling the reader how the world works, like the principles of the world. And you can do this in just a few sentences. And even that opening line and, on that first page tells the reader something about your world. For character, the character, if the character, this was really funny. I actually wrote this down verbatim because I really liked, it was kind of a funny comment, but it was also eye-opening, like, oh, okay. And it's helpful to keep this phrase in mind when you are revising your novel. And that's, if the character gets what it wants and it turns out to be what they needed, then you've told a bad story. So you've got, at the beginning of the book, you have what the character wants. And by the end of the story, he gets what he needs, which isn't necessarily what he wants, but it's definitely, part of that story, character arc, rather. So if the character wants something at the beginning of the book and he gets it, and it turns out to be, what he needed too, then there is no character arc. And so that's a bad story. So something to kind of keep in mind. Under stakes, this was asterisked as the most important element of your opening. So, and that's because the stakes are what get the reader to read the book, to keep reading. It's part of the hook. It's about the emotions so stakes are about emotions, therefore they are about relationships. And a character divided against themselves is what makes interesting reading. That's part of that character arc and how they change and how they are with other people. And that's, so as the character wants evolve, then the stakes and the risks evolve too. And that becomes part of the story arc as well as the character arc. So that was interesting. And then the last part of those elements of an opening are promises. And that's part of the structure. So the stakes are about the heart of the story. And the promises are about the shape of them, the body of them. So that was a cool part. That was like the morning part of the masterclass. And then we went into actual writing and working on our own works in progress. So I started plugging some of these opening elements into my novel work in progress and discovered a little bit about my project and how the character wants at the beginning are too vague to set up high stakes. So I had to kind of tweak that around a little bit. And we would read off a little bit about what we thought our character arcs were. And then he would give us feedback on what made it tight and interesting and riveting, to have that hook be ready for the reader and to get them to turn the pages and such. And then we actually rewrote our first scene based on those elements and characters and wants, at the beginning, and dissected that a little bit. And then we worked on first lines, and that was really interesting. One of the exercises was to write a first line of your novel 3 different ways, and not just like 3 different versions of it, but like completely different, I don't want to say concepts, but 3 different ideas for an opening line, but not just a tweaked opening line that was mildly different 3 different ways, but completely different. So, for instance, here I'll just read 2 of mine. So one is, Nicole loved that there was both river and ocean in her hometown. Astoria, Oregon had claimed the life of her father, but had given her a son, a cheerful, blonde 4-year-old that carried a stuffed frog wherever he went. So that's one idea for a beginning. And then another one is, same story, same characters, same wants and needs. Foster dogs and morning jogs on the boardwalk after dropping her son off at preschool were the only things that kept Nicole from wallowing in self-pity or screaming. That, and making her boss, Mahala, smile. Hearing her giggle was the best part of working at the Indian restaurant. So 2 completely different ideas on how to start the novel, and, basically different I mean, it's the same character, Nicole. She's the main character, but there are different characters in those first lines. Her son is part of it, and then her boss is in the other one. So anyways, that was really interesting. And basically, the whole class was ended and surmised with start your story as strong as you possibly can, because you've got 10 pages to capture an agent's attention or a reader's attention. So that was that. I also met and talked with Jeff Goins, and I went to his keynote address, and I went to 2 of his workshops. And I bought one of his books and got this autograph, and I got a selfie with him. And I did look up the podcast name, which is The Portfolio Life with Jeff Goins. So check out that podcast if you want to hear some snippets from him. And his class was all about taking an idea for a book and turning it into a best-selling book. And some of the principles I had heard before, and so I didn't take too many notes, but it was a really dynamic workshop, and I really like hearing him do public speaking. The takeaways I got from that set of classes were to bake the marketing into the book itself. So basically when you're taking your idea and turning it into a book, you want to take a surprising and new idea, but also a familiar idea. It can't be too out of the what, because then people won't take it seriously, or maybe won't even be interested because it's such a new idea that it's not on their radar. And then he talked a lot about, he didn't talk a lot, but one of the things that he brought up as a explanation for that was Tim Ferriss, who wrote The 4-Hour Workweek. And that was his principle, or his idea at the beginning, was that you could work 4 hours in the week and get all your work done. And that was surprising and new, but he hadn't actually created that idea himself. It was just one that he noticed other people doing, that there were younger people working globally on laptops and traveling around the world and having this, I think the phrase is lifestyle design. So he didn't create lifestyle design, he just named it. So Jeff Goins said, once you don't have to create a thing or create an idea or create a new worldview. You just have to name it, because once you name it, then you own it. So he talked about that, having an idea that changes a worldview, and you validate it, and you speak about it, and you write the book about it, and you keep promoting it. And this is how it turns into a bestseller. So it's having that idea that's really awesome, but also the timing of it. And the idea was then just to keep promoting it until it is the right time for it. And then building that platform. And the platform isn't necessarily, doing blog tours or something like that. It's about people and making connections with people face to face, even if you're introverted and it scares the crap out of you. Okay. So those ideas, the takeaways on the idea itself were to take a conventional idea and subvert it somehow. And that's what makes it memorable. And you find your audience and you communicate that idea to them. And you don't have to be, this was a fun little quote, you don't have to be right with your idea. You don't have to be right, but you have to be interesting. And that's what's going to start people talking. Like the 4-Hour Workweek was... it was controversial. Some people were like, ooh, I want to do that, so I'm going to buy the book and find out how to do that. And other people were like, you can't do that. That's impossible. And we get all angry. And so it started conversations, and that generates book sales. So that led him to becoming a bestseller. So how to create an interesting idea is you pick a commonly held belief, and you find a way to disagree with it. So the phrase that you can plug in is, everyone thinks X, but what actually is true is Y. So if you can take your idea and plug it into this sentence, then you've kind of got like, an elevator pitch, basically, a way to start the conversation. Make it really clear and simple. And again, that phrase becomes that invitation to have the conversation. And that's what gets people talking, and that's what sells books. So you've got your idea first, and then you need a category, basically. So what kind of book is this? And then what are the conventions of that category, and plug your book into that. So, if it's a business book, then the convention of a business book now is to start with some anecdotal story that's compelling, and then you go into the business part of your book and pull the thread of that anecdotal story throughout the rest of the book. Well, another suggestion he had, which I'd heard lots of other authors say, was to read 5 best-selling current books in your category and study them, and then you'll know what the conventions are for that genre that you are writing in. Let's see. What else? Oh, and then the structure of that book can either be a narrative arc, and that format involves building suspense or building a case gradually, and you use suspense and intrigue as bait to get them to finish reading the rest of the book, where there's a big payoff at the end, whether it's a novel or a business book or something, or self-help. Or you write a modular book, and that is like a big idea theme, at the top, and then you build your argument for that logically, and you can almost not all business books or self-help books are written in that modular format, but most are, and not all novels are written in narrative arc, but some are. Most are, excuse me. So basically, choose your format, outline the book. You've got the big question of the book, whether it's fiction or non, at the beginning, and you start with the smaller questions, and you keep asking questions, and you end the book by answering. You've finished the book because you've answered all the questions that have come up throughout the course of the book. And that's, your arc of the book. The next class I took had to do with grammar, because I'm also an editor, and, I'm kind of a grammar nerd. So I'm not going to talk about grammar, because the person that gave the grammar talk was really interesting and really funny, and I can't talk about grammar in interesting and funny ways. But we did dive into positions of emphasis and passive voice and propositions and punctuating dialogue and that sort of stuff. But she did it in a really hilarious way. So I don't really have anything to share on that one. I did take a class on humor in writing, and the big takeaways I got from that were just that humor is not a genre. It's just kind of an adjective to the genre. So it's a tool. It captures the attention of the reader. It builds suspense. It deepens characters. And it's also unique to the writer. And that just has to do with the sense of humor that you have. What I find funny is not going to be the same as, something else. My husband thinks stuff that he watches comedies that I think are stupid. So his sense of humor is different than mine in some cases. We do laugh together, and I'm grateful for that. But some of the stuff he watches I don't find funny. Let's see. Something else that I did at the conference was, who is this one? Oh, this was also, this was Jeff Gwain's keynote speaker address. And I just took a few notes while he was talking, basically on how to be a thriving artist. One is to own the title. I'm an artist. I'm a writer. own that title. And you believe it until you become it. Not fake it till you make it, but believe it until you become it. And I like that phrase better. And then 2 was act like an apprentice. And this really fascinates me because I remember being an emerging writer and before I was published, and I wanted to know what writers did. I wanted to be a fly on the wall. I just wanted to follow someone around and do everything that they did, but I just didn't know what authors did every day. So apprenticing is, they don't really do this anymore in the world, but it used to be that for 7 years you apprenticed a master, and then you would, let's see if I can remember how it works. You would, I think for 7 years you followed this artist around and you would just do everything he told you to do, whether it was like taking out the trash or, whatever he told you to do, you would do. And you observed him and you lived with him and you just watched what this guy did for 7 years, and you learned things along the way. And then you would go out and be a journeyman. And at some point you had to submit your art to the guild, and they would say that you were, a master or not. And if you weren't, then you had to keep working at it until you could submit something that the guild said, okay, this is worthy of you being a master, and then you became a master. So becoming or acting like an apprentice, I think it's really valuable as authors to remember and to think like, because, sometimes we get frustrated because we're not making money right now on book sales, or we're not getting noticed, or, some of those things. And we get frustrated by how long it takes to write a book, or how much work revising is, or, we think it's just going to be great. And we have this romantic view of what authors' lives are like. But the reality is it's hard work, and you have to have a tough skin, and you have to rework your stuff over and over and over again. And multiple people are telling you, this is still lacking here, and you got to change this, and this is confusing, and can you say this in a different way, and I think you should start your book here instead of there, and what if you did this instead? And it's just the workshopping of your novel or your nonfiction book is hard work, and it takes a tough skin. So having that recognition that we're not going to be great right away, you can't be an Olympic medalist in a year. You start when you're a kid and you do your sport for years and years and years and years, and you have daily practice and you work hard and you have no other life but this thing. And then maybe you can get to the Olympics, and maybe you can get, on the team, and maybe you can get a medal or some sort of notice, have somebody notice you. But we don't think about the same way with writing. Or another example I've heard is musical instruments. Learning how to play an instrument takes daily practice, or learning a new language takes daily practice. And it takes years to become fluent. And we often don't, as writers, think of our craft the same way. And we get impatient with ourselves, and we want to be great right away. And we have this imposter syndrome, and we just have these frustrations about not being great right away. But if it takes 7 years before you can even do master work, just think about that. That doesn't mean you can't publish anything for 7 years. It just means that it's going to maybe take you 7 years before you have enough work, backlist novels and books that you can put out to the world, and you're going to get better with every book, obviously. So maybe it's going to take 7 years before you get noticed, whether that's traditionally or indie publishing. But I don't know. It was just good to hear that again, and just a good reminder. Act like an apprentice. And then number 3 is to practice in public. And he said that marketing, when you practice in public, you are marketing. So you talk about your work while you're creating it. And that, of course, talking about the work is marketing. And he said, once a day, share a piece of art in the public. And that exposure doesn't pay the bills, but still be as generous as you can with the skills that you have in ways that, will help you. All right. So we talked about, I took a class from Larry Brooks on story development. It was all stuff I'd heard before. This was a cool quote. This was in Hallie Ephron's class. She said, this was actually a quote by Walter Mosley. He said, story is what happens and plot is the order in which it is revealed. So this whole class was on mystery writing and revealing secrets. And I don't write mystery, but I still think it's important to learn the tactics of building suspense and how to reveal secrets. So it was a really interesting class. And she talked about having the characters need something in their backstory that motivates them to do the things that they're doing in the book. She talked about the arc of the character and the plot points and the confrontation and, when you reveal secrets during those places. She said to hide clues in the middle of paragraphs. To put it in there, but don't explain it. And she said that hiding a real clue among the red herrings makes it hard for readers to find them, because you don't want your readers to find all your clues and figure out the ending, before the ending, because then it's predictable and they're bored and they'll put it down. The author decides, this was really interesting to me, the author decides in which order to reveal secrets to the characters of the book, but also the order in which to reveal it to the reader. And so it was a good reminder that sometimes the reader knows things before the characters do, and sometimes the characters know something before the reader does. So that was really interesting. And she also said that when she starts a novel, she has a why file, and she wants to know, why am I doing this? And she has to have a really rock solid answer for why she's writing this book before she writes the book, because it helps, because writing books is long and sloggy and hard sometimes. So you need to remind yourself why you're doing it in the first place. I took a class on leveraging your local library, and this was really interesting. I got a few questions of my own answered about author events and what works good. They said that panels work really well, and that if you want to get your books in libraries, how it works is there is a materials selector, so someone who decides, what books are going to be there, and then you have to fill out they put in a suggestion for purchase. So they don't decide. They decide. It's kind of like first interview, second interview. So the materials selector in the library will decide, hey, I want this book in the library. I think it would be good, and here's the suggestion for that purchase, and here's why. And they'll look for evidence that that other people are looking for that book. So they check the patron requests if there are any for that, because they really want to cater to their patrons. So if the patrons are saying, "Hey, I want to read this book," the librarians want to support the patrons, so they'll look at the book that the patron is requesting and check the reviews for it, and to see if it's going to be a good fit and how much does it cost. And also some of the main things that help them say yes to purchasing a book is if it has already been pre-processed. So if you want your book in libraries, you have to have your book through Ingram or through Baker and Taylor. That's where they purchase books. So if your book is not available in those places, and it has to have an ISBN, then and so ISBN, you also have to have a 40% discount That's through Ingram, I believe, at least a 40% discount. And if you can have it pre-processed already, that's awesome, because that means there's a barcode on it, and it's already set up for the library system. And if that's done, then that's A plus, and they really like that, and that will encourage them to buy the book if it's already pre-processed. And for authors, she suggested introducing yourself via email. Make it personalized, to the library or even to the librarian if you know the librarian's name. And just say, I'm a local author. Here's my book. Here's 3 reviews, for the book right there. And here's the book description. And, just kind of create sort of a one page for them, but individualized for the specific library. And you can also suggest, with that emailed intro, to offer to come in and meet them face to face and show them the book. And that really helps librarians also know if it's going to be a good book. If it looks self-published, and they're holding it in their hands and, just the format's kind of wonky, then they're not going to be as interested. But if your product is professional and they just don't know yet, if you come in and you show them the book and they can hold it in their hands and see how professional it is, then they'll be more likely to merchandise it and recognize it. And, oh yeah, we have this local author and she brought her book in. I just want to show it to you. Because patrons will come up to librarians and say, what should I read next? And so they'll have you in mind. It's just like a bookstore in terms of merchandising. So, and local authors are always, impressive. So people, sometimes I buy books because they take place in, the town I live in or in the state I live in. So being a local author is important to readers and bookstore owners and librarians. So that was that part. One of the other things that the librarians suggested is to send an email out to your list with instructions on how to request your book be in the library. And I loved that idea, so I'm definitely going to do that for my list. It's on my to-do list. And you can also let the library know that your book is available in Overdrive. If it is, Overdrive is the way that libraries purchase ebooks. So if you have an ebook and it is available for sale through Overdrive, then libraries can purchase it through Overdrive. And the way to get your book for sale in Overdrive is to go through Kobo, because they automatically put all their books through Overdrive as well. So you can upload your book directly with Kobo and check the box that says, yes, you want it to go to Overdrive as well. Or you can do it through Draft to Digital. And I believe Publish Drive also have the option of checking the box saying that they want it available through Overdrive. So those are the ways to get your book into Overdrive so that libraries can then purchase it. If you want to do a literary event or an author signing or a panel or something at the library, then you need to go to the library's website and there's some sort of tag or tab that says program proposal form or something like that. It's going to be called different things in different libraries, but something like that. And the only other interesting tidbit was that traditional publishers most often put an embargo on the ebook for 90 days before librarians can buy the book. So that was interesting. I don't know why that is, but yeah. So the main things are to cover that the cover is professional and genre specific, that it's been copy edited, it has an ISBN, and that the formatting is professional as well. I also went to a class called Pixar and the Craft of Storytelling, and it was long and not something that I can give you tidbits from, because it had kind of a structure all on its own. But I will say that Pixar has a process when they're pitching and creating their movies. And the first one is the initial pitch, and that was where their team would come up with 3 different ideas for movies. And they would have different characters and different worlds, so 3 completely different ideas for a movie, and they would pitch that in the initial pitch. And then the second stage would be research, and that's where they would really dive into the story idea. Like, what's the theme of this? Where's the heart to it? Like, why are we telling this story? And then they would do an outline, and then the whole process has these ongoing pitches where the team will go and pitch continually to Pixar, and there'll be like 20-minute versions of the movie, like these little pitches. So they're tweaking it all the way through. And then they would get to the reels, REELS, and these would be kind of like, like comic book versions of the story, like different panels, like of the movie through the whole thing. And then there would be table readings, where this would be the first opportunity for the writers to hear the words out loud, dialogue, and then the first draft of the screenplay would be written. So all of this work happens like before the first draft is even written. So I guess that was kind of the point of his talk, was that this is a really long process, and sometimes it takes 7 years to make a movie, and all of the time before the rough draft is even done takes a whole year for this process to get, for the Pixar process to get to that rough draft stage is a whole year. And then you do the second draft, and that's where you've got, again, more panels and more sketches. And then there's the reel to time reels, and they're real sketchy, like it's actually film, but it's just kind of sketches still at that point. And it goes on from there. So I guess it was just a reminder that if you have an idea for a book, take the time to really flesh it out and make it amazing. And if it takes you a year to get to that point before you even write your first draft, that's fine. Sometimes Pixar would scrap a story and not scrap a story. They would get to a point where they were almost at the end and it's just not working. And so they'll go back and they'll redo it until it works. So I know as an author, I want to have, ultimately my goal for story production is to publish 2 books a year. I think that would be great. But I am so far not close to that yet. I can't even get 1 book published every 2 years at this point, because I just don't have the muscles built up yet. And the more often I write books, the faster it will happen. The publications will come faster and faster. The first book I wrote took 8 years. The second book I wrote took 18 months. The third book took less than that. And, so and the reason why I haven't published something new in quite some time is because the story ideas I have are still broken. I'll write it completely and I'll check in with my alpha readers and it doesn't work. So I replot it and I rewrite it, and then something else gets stuck and I have to fix that broken thing and I replot it. And so I'm going back over and over to the beginning and finding the broken bits and fixing them. And if I didn't care about my product, then I wouldn't do that. I would just write something and put it up on, on the bookstore sites. But I care about my product being great and I care about it being professional. So I keep going over it until I get it right. So don't be discouraged if it's taking you way longer than you think it's going to. That's the writing process of many, many, many authors around the world. A a couple of takeaways from the Pixar talk was that in regards to character, that the character obviously needs to grow and change in the presence of another character they're with. So most often books are not just singular character, nobody else interacting. That would be a pretty internal book and might not be super interesting. But often the way characters grow is because they're, butting heads with other characters. And so whatever stands at the core of the main character's identity is brought into focus by the nature of the partner, whether it's a traveling partner or a romantic partner or a parent partner or something, but the other character, the partner character in the story, that's how we know who the main character is, by how he interacts with those other characters in the story and how he grows and changes in the story. Another question to ask yourself is, what does the character fear most? And then make the antagonist be that or represent that. And then another thing I liked, Scott Myers was the person that gave the talk, and he's a screenwriter, and he said, give them what they expect, meaning them, the reader, give them what they expect, and then give them what they want. So I'm trying to think if there was an example he gave so if as a reader, if you expect the book to end a certain way, go ahead and end it that way, but then also give them, what they want to. Give them what they expect and then give them what they want. I think that's all I'm going to say about that class. And then the last class I took had to do with, again, openings to stories. It's called the Freshman 15, like the first 15 pages of your book. What are you doing in there to hook the reader? And oftentimes, or always, almost always, the first 15 pages of the book, and then some, are, if you're doing a classic, kind of hero's journey arc, that's the beginning of the story. That's the setup. That's the ordinary world. So how do you make the ordinary world interesting enough to hook the reader to get them to that place where they go into the special world or to the extraordinary? And that's where the book, after the inciting incident, after it really gets in there and starts working and the story begins, what can you do before the story begins to hook the reader? And I really liked this, and this is why I wanted to bring it up. She said, find a moment of extreme hope, fear, anxiety in that ordinary world. She called it the turnip world, and it had something to do with something else that she said in there that made sense, but I didn't write that part down, so I can't remember. So, but I quite like the idea of the ordinary world being called the turnip world, so I put it in. So find a moment in that turnip world where there's extreme hope or fear or anxiety in that ordinary world. So obviously it's not going to be anywhere near the hookiness of the interesting part of the story, but if you're just showing them in their ordinary world, they're coming home from work and they're making a microwave pizza or, whatever, like, where is there something in there that is just a little bit extraordinary? And do that really interesting story before the story gets started. And that proves to your reader that you know how to tell a story, you know how to write, and that sets the promise that you've got this authoritative voice that will carry them through the rest of the book. So anyway, can you show why your main character is the worst person for the job of taking you on the rest of this story? Like in the hero's journey, that inciting incident is that call to action. Like, okay, you're going to do this, right? And the main character is usually like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm terrible at that. Or, kind of like any Harry Potter or Star Wars or whatever, where the main character is thrust into a place where they have to do this courageous thing and they just don't feel like they're ready and they don't want to do it. So how do you show your reader that the main character is the worst person for the job and then take them into that extraordinary world? So those two things I thought were really interesting. Find something that is hopeful or anxiety or fear or whatever that you can really beef up in the ordinary world and kind of tell like a little mini story before the story happens, and that will help hook the reader. So I thought that was really interesting. And then again, do the show why your main character is the worst person for the job, and that sets the stakes higher, I think. Like, oh my God, how's he ever going to do this because he's so inept? He's the worst person for this job and he has to do this. So then the reader reads to see, what that's all about. The only other thing that I wanted to share with you was writerly related. We had a chapter like meet and greet. And so people from the Eugene chapter came and we just had like a little social half hour. And I talked with them about things that they needed help with as writers. And some of the things that came up were mindset, work-life balance, mental health as a writer, imposter syndrome, the perils of following writing advice. That was a good one. Writing process, having finishing energy, like having really excitement for new projects and getting books started, but then not having the finishing energy to finish those writing projects and get them out into the world. The concept of beta reading and finding beta readers for their own work, and also having connection with other writers. So if these are topics that resonate with you, I will be trying to cover them in the podcast in future dates. And I also have some other ideas about getting extra voices in the podcast and maybe including a monthly interview as well. Like maybe the last week of the month can be an interview with someone else besides just me. So that might give you something else to look forward to in future podcasts. And I have some ideas about how I want to work with local libraries in my area. And then hearing that talk about leveraging your local libraries got some more ideas percolating too. So again, my main purpose for this podcast and for other projects that I do is to be supportive of the writing community around the world. And if I can help you in any way, I would really love to hear your requests and challenges that you're facing and how I can help. So be well, happy writing, happy publishing. And next week we will go into more mindset stuff. So please stay tuned and I'll see you next week.